Welcome back to the Blog Boy Roundtable. We've only got 3 blog boys this week, but we've got a lot of stuff to talk about. So we'll start. We only picked one game last week, the old Army-Navy game. Everybody was on Army except for Vito, who did the smartest thing and the thing you should do in seemingly every single Academy game. Took the under 27.5, and it looked really good for about 58 minutes.
Fellas, let me tell you, I thought we had that in the bag.
And then it looked really good until there was about, 30 seconds left.
And then Army decided to do, I guess, technically the smart thing. And after they stopped Navy, and actually very impressive goal line stand, because Navy was moving. And I thought, oh, this is going to overtime. Army decided, instead of taking a knee or running the ball, we're going to just go ahead and run around for a little bit and then go outside the back of the end zone. And boom, over. A lot of people very upset.
Yeah, if you got it super early, that's the one bad thing about doing the show kind of not like on a Monday or a Sunday, is sometimes stuff will move. That one moved against you. You could early in the week, you could have got a little better and able to cash, but still, it looked pretty good for a very long time. Navy looked totally out of their depth, no pun intended.
I'm going to use a Colin Sherwin special and say it's malfeasance. Doesn't count.
It was tough, but the show went 4-1 last week, so that takes our season record to 169 wins, 144 losses.
Nice,
which is 53.99% winning percentage. That's pretty good for the whole regular season. Over 300 games, basically 54%. Good job, fellas. Good year. We were going to talk some bowl games, and we can't. Are there any bowl games that caught your guys' eye? We were going to kind of, what is there a game that's kind of your favorite? But we just also got the SEC schedule just released, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about.
A lot of interesting.
We can
that one. So
we could do a lot of different things. I mean, I feel like with the bowl games, like taking it week by week probably makes the most sense. But I mean, how about Celebration Bowl this weekend? You see, FAMU versus Howard. Oh. And for the USF crowd, that's FAMU. They're only lost to USF. Howard, former USF football player, Larry Scott's at the helm. And Liz Lamar's the offensive coordinator. So that's going to be a fun one. Celebration Bowl is always a must-watch game this week. So I know that's going to be a fun one. I'm actually trying to figure out if that's on Friday or Saturday. Yeah, and there's Celebration Bowl in Atlanta. It's a good one.
Yeah, it's going to be Saturday. There's a ton of games. I didn't realize how many games there were this weekend. I
do a bowl pick'em with one of my family. That's my wife's uncle. He does a bowl pick'em, but he only goes like half the bowls. So he starts like December 23rd. So I'm like, man, I can't even pick the USF game. But like half these games, I'm like, don't need to research them because, ooh, buddy, there's some special ones.
Yeah, the one that like if this was 10 years ago, you'd be like, this will be a great game. UCLA Boise State in the LA Bowl hosted by Gronk, I guess. But there's a ton of opt-outs and transfers and things like that. So this is why we're not picking bowl games on the show. It's just like if we were really, if we're really betting our money, we wouldn't be picking them, I don't think, just because of the uncertainty. We'll probably pick the playoff. But, yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of bowls on Saturday. Nothing like crazy that stands out, but UCLA Boise State is kind of the big brand game. Cal Texas Tech could be interesting. I know Cal lost their offensive coordinator, I believe. That could be a fun one. Western Kentucky Old Dominion could be a fun one. I think they probably have most guys playing and be somewhat motivated. Jacksonville State is playing against Louisiana and New Orleans in the New Orleans Bowl. That could be a fun one.
I always liked the New Orleans Bowl just for the vibe and the aesthetic of it. It's always great seeing college football games played in the Superdome. Just the only thing is that in recent years they've moved the New Orleans Bowl to the afternoon. It's like, nah, man, you need that at night when all the fans, especially all the Louisiana fans, are liquored up.
Yeah, you have to do the whole pre-tailgate and then head on to the game. That's always fun. The one that's also interesting to me is it's on Monday technically, but the Bahamas Bowl, which isn't in the Bahamas because they're renovating their stadium, which is like 90% of the reason why you go. But I always love this game because it's always on a Monday in the afternoon and people are at work or, they go to they go hang out. It's like, oh, there's a football game on during lunch break. Like, I'm just going to watch this game now. But it's not the Bahamas Bowl anymore. It's moved to Charlotte, which if you're going to pick a replacement for the Bahamas is not necessarily one I would choose.
Sure.
But now it's called the famous Toastery Bowl, which I had no idea was until I recently went to Charlotte and got brunch there with a couple of my friends. And I went, this is actually pretty darn good. And then they became a bowl. So there you go.
There you go. Yeah, and then probably before we record, UTSA Marshall could be another. That could be a fun one. We may be recording when that one's going on next week. The Scooters Coffee Frisco Bowl, and then after that, you got USF.
I researched it. It's so weird because it's in Frisco, Texas. Scooters Coffee is based out of Omaha, like, and it's like that's like the only place. Like, all right.
They're not allowing the Omaha Bowl, I guess.
So that's the hard thing about these games is you start doing a little bit of research, and like half the time you do bowl pick, and you're like, they did well, and then you start looking, it's like, oh, Marshall lost their starting quarterback to the portal. Oh man, Boise State lost their starting quarterback. Oh my gosh, who's actually playing at Cal? So at Ohio had a really good season, but everybody's gone. So it's like, how do you do this? At some point, it's like attrition, like who's actually playing for who? Okay.
And that can kind of lead into a conversation a little bit about kind of the future of college football a little bit. There are some people that say, let's play the bowl games at the start of the next season. That'd be cool. I mean, it'd be cool to play them as like the spring game too. Like have your spring practice and then play the bowl game. Could be fun for some of these. But the one thing I wanted to talk about is there's been a couple kind of pretty newsworthy things in terms of the NCAA. And, I have to ask, is the NCAA just totally cooked? And we've talked about a great separation happening. Is it going to happen sooner rather than later? Because we had last week, I believe, you had the new president of NCAA put forth a proposal that everybody gets paid $30,000, or at least half your student athletes get paid $30,000, and they could still get name, image, likeness stuff. I don't think most teams are going to go for that. Why would you do that? If you just want to play your football players, why not just break off football into its own separate thing? And then that coupled with the transfer limitation ruling that came out today, where at least for the next 2 weeks, the ban on being a two-time transfer and being immediately eligible is off. So it's Wild Wild West. And apparently, I think if you jump in, there was some clarification may be needed, but if you jump in football as a second-time transfer and go somewhere, you'd be kind of under this umbrella of it being eligible. I don't know if that would be eligibility going forward but there is some thought that you could jump in football as well. So that would change a lot, I would think. But do these two things kind of in conjunction, the NCAA kind of tacitly admitting that you need to pay the players somehow, does that just accelerate the separation of like the big sports?
Yeah, they know that they're cooked. I think you asked if it's sooner rather than later. I think around 2030, when like the Big Ten's TV deal is up, I think that's
Notre Dame too.
In Notre Dame, that's going to be like the doomsday apocalypse where everything changes. I think that's when you start really getting into the Super League thing that's been floating around the last couple of years, the Super League idea, and I think that's when you really see these schools break off and form their own thing. The NCAA is like cooked, especially in court. They thought that they could argue these things and rely on Congress to bail them out, and it's like, nope, you're not real.
No, but you'd have to, what is the approval rating for the NCAA the last 30 years? Has anybody ever been like, you know what, the NCAA is awesome. They make great decisions routinely. Like, what do they think is going to happen? Like the court of public, not just like real court, but the court of public opinion. Like people are going to be on their side.
Like the court, it's
so tone deaf.
It's interesting. The court of public opinion has really changed in like the last 15 years because it used to be like whenever like a USC or somebody else would get in trouble, you would usually like get people agreeing like, yeah, they should be punished, whatever, broke the rules, you can't pay players. And then in like the last decade, it's totally flipped. And yeah, man.
Do you guys think that that's flipped because of the perception of the SEC that they're all cheating?
Well, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying, and they definitely do a lot better than some of the other conferences.
They
I
don't
think
use specs.
the funny thing is, sorry, what I say is not 100%. Don't take what I said. Everything's fine. I promise. When everyone goes like, well, the NCAA this, the NCAA that, they're failing. It's like, well, they take care of all the other sports as well, so you can't completely cut them out of everything. You can carve them out of football because for FBS they don't control the national championship or any of that. And how that's happened over the past 30, 40 years has been interesting. And I don't know how you go ahead. These programs are becoming more than just college. These are more than just college athletes. When you put NIL into this bucket and it's become what it is, and the NCAA is trying to say, hey, Congress, help us out. We need to figure this out. And they're like, hey, we're not going to do anything about this. So you need to figure this out. So now you say, even with the transfers, everybody can transfer at any point in time. I mean, I'd be afraid to do that right now with this, kind of in between period, because they'll come up with something. And then all of a sudden you get caught in the crosshairs of where you're going. Like, that's the only thing that I'd be afraid of is you have a 2-week grace period, you transfer again. Then all of a sudden, oh no, you get one free transfer and that's it. We made this, into law now or whatever. We made this policy.
And that's what happened to guys last time.
Yeah, exactly. You all of a sudden like, what about the blanket? Well, we had that as a blanket, but now there's a rule, and that's, this is never about it's never about the kids, right? They're always trying to just, and they care more about the schools than anything else. But like at some point, I think you're right. The big money programs can make their own money doing their own thing, and I think that's what you're kind of seeing with the SEC and the Big Ten right now. We kind of already pushed towards a Super 2 with FSU being left out. You kind of see what that's doing. All of a sudden, who are the big conference or who are the big programs that can come together and say, we're going to do our own thing for college football only and break off and make even more money? We don't need the NCAA. We can do what we want. Everyone can transfer wherever they want. They can come in and do whatever they want. And the education's a side part of it, but we're focusing on the sport of football.
Yeah. And there's thought of this coming to basketball too, that maybe they'll have their own tournament. I wouldn't be surprised if you get one day where you maybe have especially if this NBA in-season tournament is the idea takes off, if maybe you get a Power 5 in-season tournament and then, or, the same guys that are breaking off in football and then still the same NCAA tournament at the end of the year. But I think the football split's coming sooner rather than later. And it's kind of, do you want to spend money? And my guess would be, and this is why I thought that nobody would kind of be interested in the model the NCAA put forward. If football breaks off, they're not going to want to have any type of Title IX conflict. They're going to do what they can to split it away from Title IX, so they don't have to pay anybody else on campus if they don't want to. So
one thing a lot about
shocked if anybody kind of is on board with what the NCAA proposed.
One thing a lot about basketball is what makes the NCAA basketball tournament as it is so fun is everyone loves that opening round and seeing the Cinderellas knock off the big ones.
Yes.
If you go ahead and say our Super 2 is going to have our own tournament, people are going to watch. They're not going to care as much. Now, people do care about the Elite Eight and the Final Four. That's all still fun and games, but you get the casual, you get the hundreds, you get the casual viewers because they like to see St. Peter's beat Kentucky. Yeah. So, the more and more you chop that off, the more and more you lose that, kind of nostalgia and that neat quirk that only that tournament can provide, because only that tournament gives you that interest.
And that's why I think if that's something they want to do, they should keep that. But they might try to sell another tournament and pocket that money themselves, possibly at some point during the season, especially if the NBA tournament kind of first year. People seem to like it. If it kind of keeps gaining momentum, that could be something maybe we see in the future. We already see a kind of, ACC Big Ten challenges, all that kind of stuff. So would be an extension of that, I guess. But yeah, I think the NCAA's days are numbered. So it's kind of about getting on the forefront of what's next. And I think that'll obviously be some type of revenue sharing with players. And we'll see how that
turns out. Stars. I can't find any pearls to clutch.
What's funny is the dominance of Georgia and Alabama in recruiting has probably made a lot more people be like, let's just pay these guys so we can have a salary cap. Like if you ask the same people 10 years ago, they probably be like, don't pay the players. They get a scholarship. But now they're like, we need a salary cap. We need collective bargaining. so the transfer portal is not a free agent. So I think we're gonna get a little mini NFL, but hopefully you can keep some of the college charm and not just make it a worse NFL. So we'll see. Speaking of the NFL, we've got some pretty tough schedules just released in the SEC. There are some brutal stretches. There's a couple schedules that are going to get people fired. It was like we were talking Florida off here. It's like Florida's schedule was built in a lab to get Billy Napier fired as soon as possible. And we'll go through some of these schedules. Just kind of, there is what's interesting about this mix as opposed to kind of the Big Ten pulling teams from the Pac-12. There are some rivalries here already of what they're bringing in, which is kind of an interesting when you bring teams that most of them have not been in the same conference. But there is some interesting rivalries that are being brought in with Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC. We talked about Florida. Here's their schedule. Miami at home, Sanford at home, Texas A&M at home, at Mississippi State, bye week, Central Florida at home, at Tennessee, which, as Nick pointed on Twitter, is not the third week in September, which is a travesty, but such is life. Kentucky at home, bye week, and then here's the fun part for Florida. Georgia at Jacksonville, at Texas, LSU at home, Ole Miss at home, at Florida State.
Oh, my God.
That is tough.
They literally they don't have a SoCon Saturday before they play at Florida State, who's going to be good again in Tallahassee. And so they play Sanford week 2, and then their other
who might be top 15 or something.
Their other non-conference game is UCF, which I mean, Gus Bus, baby.
They play 11. They play 11 Power 5 teams, I think, and 10 teams that made a bowl game this year. What
a slog. And I just kind of want to lead into this because we were looking at some of these schedules and like, okay, like take off everything, take off the hat about like what's going on with the NCAA and everything that was college football, but like you're getting the helmet games that people apparently want. There's a lot of this going on here, but how many of these programs are going to be okay with losing 4, 5, 6 games a year and that being the ceiling? Maybe you get one good season, but man, there's so much here. You get, it's hard to play week in and week out already in the SEC, and now forget about it. And then Florida, when you schedule like this, what are you doing? But I mean,
yeah, Florida's athletic director's done the coaches no favors.
Nope.
I mentioned this before we went on air. It's like these SEC teams, they signed up for this. You signed up for this. You got your extra TV money from getting Oklahoma and Texas. Well, this is the result. Florida, like Billy Napier is probably not going to even make it till October, or not October, Halloween.
Napier's like, I said, I'm okay with this conference schedule, but Florida State, Miami, and UCF. I mean,
imagine, like, just in Florida in particular, like, imagine Steve Spurrier getting this schedule. He would turn tables and head up to Birmingham himself.
Well, that's in like the teams that when he was around, it was like the schedule started bad team, like really bad team, Kentucky, who was bad, Tennessee. Every year is like 1, 2, 3. That's how the schedule started every year. Now Kentucky's a lot better. You don't get that first game. Your first game out the box is Miami at home. So you've got two coaches that are kind of in a little bit of make or break seasons, kind of. I mean, Mario's not. I don't think his seat is hot, but if he has a really bad year, it starts to get there. So, yeah, it's tough, but it's kind of tough all around. Oklahoma, interesting schedule. So this is you'll like this. They got a little American Conference flavor here. Temple at home, Houston at home, Tulane at home, Tennessee, and Josh Heupel at home.
Oh my gosh!
On the road
straight home games.
Yeah, on the road at Auburn. By Red River against Texas, South Carolina at home, on the road at Ole Miss, Maine at home, Missouri on the road. So that's an old school game, like an old Big 8 game, right? Mm-hmm. By Alabama at home, and then at LSU to finish the season. So,
man, they only have 4 true road games, so they got hooked up in kind of that aspect.
but they get Tennessee and Alabama at home, so they get some tough ones. They're getting Fritz either way, I guess. Houston and Tulane both at home, getting them one way or they're getting Fritz one way or the other. And if if he picks up, like, I don't think he will, but if like Michael Pratt goes to Houston or something, that becomes an interesting game right off the bat. But
wow, you're right. I didn't even think about that being a possibility, but there it is.
yeah, so there's some. I mean, that's what it's kind of a crazy. You look at the games you're getting back that are really cool is you get Texas A&M back. You get Texas Arkansas, which we saw a couple years ago was a wild atmosphere. And the fun part for Texas is those are both on the road. So that's kind of your welcome to the SEC. Your schedule's not brutal. They do have – it's not easy, though. They got Colorado State at home to open the season, then at Michigan, UTSA at home, UL Monroe at home, Mississippi State at home, bye. But then you go Red River, and then the very next week at home against Georgia. And then you got Vandy on the road and a bye, and then Florida at home, Arkansas on the road, Kentucky at home, and then at Texas A&M. So
getting Michigan, I mean, and I know that when you switch to the SEC, when they finally announced the SEC, who knows when these were actually put out there. But this is brutal. That it's still, I mean, it's manageable in conference, and I think they tried to help them out a little bit because, ooh, buddy, I mean, UTSA is not going to be the same. You did ULM, but Oklahoma and Georgia back to back. Oof.
Yeah, and some of it's, and I think that you guys, if you remember differently, I think it was supposed to be at Texas, but the Big 12 and Fox, I think Fox asked to switch it to Michigan this year as part of the agreement to let Texas and Oklahoma out early. Was part of the agreement, I think. So that game was supposed to be Michigan at Texas. They flipped the order so Fox could get the game earlier. That's kind of part of their deal with the Big 12 and getting out. And then, I mean, you still have some of those SEC bye games, but there's a lot of Power 5 out of conference games. Alabama goes on the road. Listen, this stretch, Western Kentucky at home, whatever, no big deal. USF at home, that's a tough one. And then at Wisconsin right after. And then you get a bye, and then Georgia at home. On the road to Tennessee later in the year, LSU on the road, Oklahoma on the road, and then Auburn at home to end the year. So, yeah, this will be kind of the change in perception, the change in thinking that you're probably going to have to go through for most of the schools in these conferences is you're going to lose a couple of games every year now. It certainly seems like it. You may have a special team that goes through undefeated, but it's really about getting to the championship game, getting the bye, getting to the playoff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really see going undefeated at this point because at some point you're going to have a bad game and you can't win all your stinkers with schedules like this.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's also why the expanded playoff was pushed a little bit by Sankey and the SEC. They wanted to be able to, say, hey, we did all this. Let's get some of our 2-loss teams in and stack the cards a little bit.
And like a team like Auburn will be interesting because they're like when you listen to the recruiting stuff, they're a candidate to flip a bunch of really good players towards the end there. They could be bringing a top 5 class in here, and if they go and get some guys in the portal, all of a sudden they become a pretty tough out. And now, Georgia's schedule gets a little tougher. Alabama's schedule gets a little tougher. All those teams, I think Texas A&M has to play Auburn. It just gets a little bit tougher for everybody. And then as more money comes in, you'll be able to hire, better coaches, and it'll kind of get pretty wild, I think. But Georgia opens the season against Clemson in Atlanta.
Oh, this is a Clemson-Georgia season?
Yeah, Clemson in Atlanta, and then they play Alabama and Tuscaloosa. They play Auburn at home. They play at Texas, at Ole Miss, Tennessee at home, and Georgia Tech at home, and then Florida and Jacksonville, obviously. But so, like you said, Vito, like if you have a bad game in that Alabama, Auburn, Mississippi State, Texas stretch, like if you have a bad game in Mississippi State at home, you'll probably be all right. But if you play poorly at Alabama or at Texas, you could lose both those easily. It's going to be interesting to see how these, like you guys said, how will the fan bases respond to losing 3 games, and that might be a good season from now. Like losing 2 games, going 10 wins might be a great season in the SEC from here on out.
X-Men
So,
still won't
yeah.
change. It won't. It still won't change. You need to win 11 games or you're out of here.
Yeah, it's going to be brutal.
So some of these programs too, like if you're Vanderbilt, I mean, okay.
If you're Vanderbilt, you were screwed, like regardless of how this shook it out. So it's like, yeah, sure, whatever. Oklahoma and Texas, come on in.
I tell you what sucks for Vanderbilt now is they're doing. So they got Barton Simmons. They got Barton Simmons with came in with Clarkley, and he was working at 24/7. And they're recruiting. They've done a really good job identifying guys. You look at some of these guys in the portal. Every Vanderbilt player that's had a good year is getting picked. I mean, you got a receiver that was a freshman that they signed out of nowhere. Been crystal ball to Georgia, and everyone's like, "Oh, what a huge pickup! He's the number 3 receiver in the portal." It's like, dang, really? So they're in. Yeah, that sucks. But football's never been kind of their thing. They can take that money and spend it on baseball or basketball, or. So it's going to be tough.
As friend of the pod, or I think Bud Elliott always says, "Cash the checks, take the L's."
Yeah. And I tell you what, the Big Ten's not much. Big Ten's not much easier.
Now that you killed divisions there, everyone in the Big Ten West, they were always riding high. Like, okay, I just have to beat these other jabronis that are all pretty much the same conglomerate of program: Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Northwestern. Sorry, Will Kennedy. But and now it's like, oh, forget about it. I can't. One of us is going to go to Indianapolis, hang a banner for division champion, and get sacrificed to Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. But now, not anymore. And good luck. Now you got to play with USC, Oregon, Washington, and UCLA. Good luck with that.
I was thinking about that because they eliminated divisions. It's going to be kind of lame if we end up in a scenario where like Ohio State and Michigan plays back-to-back weeks. Like that game shouldn't be played in Lucas Oil Stadium, man. Nobody wants to see that. It's all about the end of the season.
Yeah. You may not have to worry about Michigan next year. Here's their schedule. Fresno State at home, Texas at home, Arkansas State at home, USC at home, Minnesota at home, at Washington, at Illinois, Michigan State at home, Oregon at home, at Indiana, Northwestern at home, at Ohio State.
Yeah, that's a tough. It ain't this year's schedule.
No. Texas out of conference, and then in conference now you got USC, Oregon, and your Ohio State game.
My goodness.
That's going to be tough, man. Next year is going to be a wild season in college football. It's going to be awesome in terms of, like you said, helmet games. It's going to suck a little bit in terms of tradition, which is obviously a huge part of college football, but Ohio State's ducking some a little bit. Their schedule's not too tough.
The interesting thing with the Big Ten is you have the dynamic now. That was always the Midwest Midwest programs. Sometimes you're playing in the snow. I know they don't like to play at night, but I mean, getting some of these, Bay Area schools now to go to the Midwest. Just the time zone thing is already going to be its own problem that you're going to see. Hey, they came out a little slow, and that's why they lost the game because the time zone adjustment. But it is what it is. But all of a sudden now you got to put in weather. How is Lincoln Riley going to do when he has to go to Iowa or whatever? What do they go to Iowa? They don't go to Iowa, but where do they go? That's cold. They go away.
Let me see.
I guess they don't at Maryland, and okay, they don't really go in. Okay, so but that was a bad example. You know what I mean, though.
I think they go play at Penn. I know, but previously, now it may have changed when the schedule's kind of changed up, but they were at Penn State at one point.
I think Penn State's coming to.
Okay, yeah, I see that at USC. They get UCLA at home though. Penn State schedule. I mean, I'd say at West Virginia. That'll be a fun one. There's some hate there. Bowling Green, Kent State, Illinois, UCLA at home, at USC, at Wisconsin, Ohio State at home, Washington at home, at Purdue, at Minnesota, Maryland at home. So no Michigan, but you trade Michigan out for USC basically.
Oregon goes to Wisconsin in November, so who knows? Who knows? UCLA goes to Washington in November. So I guess that doesn't really change things. Which one was I just looking at? Washington goes to Penn State in November. That's it. So that's an interesting dynamic with that particular conference. Just seeing, because especially in the Pac-12, you recruited at a certain level and you recruited against a certain program, and now you have to go ahead and switch what you do. But even in like the Big Ten, you had the top 3 programs, and really, frankly, it's Ohio State, at recruiting at this level, then a big drop to Michigan and Penn State, then a giant
drop.
But below my camera is then the rest of the Big Ten. So it's like, Oregon and Washington are doing really, really well. USC recruits really, really high, but now you're playing against, an Iowa or a Nebraska or a Wisconsin that plays a different type of defense than what you were playing, versus Colorado or versus the Arizonas. Man, it's gonna be really weird next year because in the Big 12, I'm not. It's gonna be really weird. It's gonna be so confusing.
It's gonna be it's gonna be a fun year for just this game. Wow, that's crazy. But we are losing some stuff. But USC. I mean, you want to talk about a schedule upgrade? LSU in a neutral at Michigan, Penn State at home, at Washington, which is not unusual. And then you finish with Nebraska, who I don't know. Matt Rule's tough, man. And then at UCLA and Notre Dame to finish your year. So, yeah, we're going to get a lot of big-time games next season. And I don't know. It'll be fun to watch, but it will be sad to see some of the traditions and that go away. But you'll still get Washington. You'll still get the Apple Cup. You'll still get the Civil War. Oregon State, I think, plays at Oregon State next year. So. But that'll be like a week 4 game, which will be weird.
Yeah, I feel bad in those regards because then at some point you start recruiting very, very vastly differently, and it just becomes not fun anymore for a rivalry. I mean, it'll be still good if they can. I mean, not like Washington State got Washington even when they were good, but still, now all of a sudden you change the dynamic there, and that's when those are out of conference. You're not quite P5, and whatever happens to the Pac-2. One question I wanted to ask you, fellas, like Nick, we'll start with you. Is there a matchup that now as a new conference matchup that you said that you think like, this will be a really fun helmet matchup, and I'm definitely going to watch that?
I would say, like a couple of years ago, it was great when LSU played Texas. Like when the championship season, like that was like one of the first early this LSU team is special. But that was a really good game. And that's an interesting one that I'm looking forward to really seeing because you have these two teams that are basically, they already clash with each other in Texas over recruiting. So that's going to get even more intense. And that's one that's going to be really great to see every year or every other year.
Yeah, that was the first when you said just like helmet game, like and just in terms of like the thinking about the two helmets like crashing into each other like old Monday Night Football.
Yeah,
those were the two I thought, LSU and Texas. But you got really, I think Texas and Georgia is an interesting one. Texas and Florida, I don't think have played very much of at all.
They had that home and home a couple years ago, and I remember that being interesting. Like just in the case of like, hey, this is our opening week game. I think they played in Jerry World one year. Just the amount of travel that people want to go and see that game because it's so interesting. So it's like getting that now in the conference slate is also a bit of a fascinating.
And then next year we get Oklahoma, Alabama. I mean, you're talking about like tradition rich, like really teams that are traditionally always pretty good. That'll be a good one. Then I think my favorite one to have back is Texas A&M. That's the game that shouldn't have left. That's one that every Thanksgiving, that was that game that weekend. It was like part of the tradition. I think they used to play on Thursdays too. I'm not sure. I don't think they will. They're going to play Saturday this year. It seems. But Egg Bowl.
It will be the last one.
NFL's killed, I think, putting a marquee game on Thursday night. So you get the craziness of the Egg Bowl.
No. Well, yeah, but see, the Egg Bowl being there is just hilarious.
It draws the eyes.
those are all good. Texas A&M, I mean, and they hate each other, and they never wanted to play each other, and now they have to. And it's going to be. And Texas A&M was all about, hey, we're in the SEC and you're not, so what's going on?
And then USC against kind of the big three of the Big Ten is fun too in terms of helmet game. USC Michigan, USC Ohio State, USC Penn State. Like USC on the road at all the three of those is something like I'm watching. Whenever it happens.
My weird helmet game, and I'm not going to call it a helmet game because we went with like typical helmet games, and I'm very excited about those. And you look at this and go, it's really, really cool to see some of these programs match up. But I want to see, and it's going to happen next year, Iowa, Washington, the unstoppable force, immovable object. Team that's all gas, no brakes, and a team that's all punts, no or all stops. I want to see that. That's going to be so much fun because it's like Iowa. Like why? Like that's not a game that any AD would even think about doing, but it's gonna happen, and we're gonna have to watch it. And it's like I know it's Is it at Iowa's at home? Never mind. It would be really great if this was a Pac-12 after dark game and Iowa's playing like
the sicko
at
mode.
11 o'clock at night, just a sickos game. But like that's one of those, like some of these Big Ten matchups are like, what are we doing here? But we'll segue a little bit into speaking of Washington, they're gonna have to replace a runner-up at Heisman and Michael Penix Jr. We'll see what they do there. But how'd you guys feel about the Heisman picks?
I was surprised Penix was second. I mean, it seemed like everyone was Bo Nix, but I guess a lot of people waited until that game to vote. And then if you did and you wanted to vote for somebody that was a winner, I think, because it seemed like a lot of people were down to Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels. Then you watch that game, you might be like, okay, well, Penix is the quarterback of this team that's undefeated, making the playoff, and he just played awesome. And then you look at his numbers. I think he was the leading passer in the country. So I was a little surprised he was second with kind of how everyone had been talking about it going into the game, but I wasn't shocked Daniels won. His season was just totally insane.
And it was a situation where it was a situation where he had to put up those numbers. He had no choice just because the defense, LSU's defense, was just incredibly mediocre this year. And they put him in a lot of situations where it's like, okay, well, I'm going to have a 400 plus yard game, 5 touchdowns, whatever, because this is what we need to do because we're going to get into a shootout. But Daniels was incredible. I know some people were complaining about how he didn't necessarily have like a single Heisman moment or whatever. But I mean, you lead a 9-3 team through the SEC with the understanding that, like I just said, the defense is not that great. And what more can you ask from a dude?
He also, he would have had his Heisman moment if a guy didn't drop a ball in the end zone against Ole Miss. Like, he led a crazy drive with hardly any time left on the clock and threw a dart that went through the guy's hands in the end zone. Like, it could have easily been caught on, a last gasp that would have beat LSU or would have beat Ole Miss and maybe changed their season. And we saw, obviously, what he did to Alabama's defense before he got hurt. Like, they had no answers for him. I think they got a pick off kind of a tip or something kind of weird. But other than that, Alabama had nothing for him. And then he got hurt and the game kind of went downhill. So, yeah, I thought he was deserving. And just if you look at the advanced stat stuff, he had a better season than Burrow did in 2019, which that seemed to be the standard. But, the offenses are so good now.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But his numbers were so nuts.
I mean, he was tops in QBR 95.7, which, whatever that stat is, but still, that's 5 away from perfect. 40 touchdowns and 4 interceptions, like that right there. And it's not even so we look at they kind of compared him. Oh, it's like Lamar Jackson, trying to be a non-playoff team winning Heisman, but he just put up stats that were just stupid. I mean, 3,800 yards passing, but he had a 72% completion percentage, and that increased every year that he played, even back to Arizona State. So he got better as a passer, and then as a runner, he was electric. His worst game was at Florida State, versus Florida State in the opener, and he still played pretty darn well. Nick, I think you're right. You just you at some point have to compensate for your defense being cheeks, and you have to just keep up with them. But they get to play Wisconsin in the former Outback, now Relia Quest Bowl on New Year's Day, and should we just try to go to that game because it's here in our backyard, and I kind of want to see him.
Let's get the Bayer Examiner credential.
Assuming he's not opting out. Is he opting out? He's probably opting out.
Maybe. Who knows? Who knows?
Lucy Nuss
man.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people were pointing back to that Florida State game. If you remember, he had a couple passes dropped that he put on a dime. Like he played pretty well, but he couldn't. Like we said, his defense was cheeks, and they could not keep up in the second half.
And I'm content with, like, week one being week one-iness, especially when you have these like high profile games. Like you can look at that, you can look at those in a vacuum and say, Florida State dominated, and that ended up being the Florida State special, was making adjustments at half.
Yeah.
But you can look at that and go, yeah, that was his worst game. But then he progressed and he got better. And then unfortunately he got injured in Alabama, because they might have won that game.
Yeah, it was.
Have this conversation.
It was tight there, so I think he's a deserving winner. But it might have really come down to like that little stretch where it seemed like Penix was sick or hurt or whatever, and they had the game against Arizona State where they didn't score a touchdown. If he can kind of just maintain his normal level in those couple games, he probably wins it. But once he dipped, and then Bo Nix had a couple losses, it seemed like that was only natural that it would go to Jaden Daniels with the crazy numbers he put up. So,
oh my gosh, I didn't even see this, but he, I knew he rushed for 10 touchdowns, but he had 1,100 yards on the ground.
It's great. Yes, he was unbelievable.
Take the 8.5 yards per carry. I'll take that every day out of my normal running back, not my quarterback. But holy, that is something.
Yeah, and his efficiency. I think his efficiency numbers would break a record. I think maybe. It's going to be close, because if he doesn't play the bowl game, I think he breaks the record. So we'll see. But I think that's it for this week. A lot of stuff going on in college football, so we want to get an episode out here, even though we only have the three of us. But probably gave us a little more room to talk without as many people, because there's a lot to talk about. So thank you guys for watching. Join us next week. We'll start talking a little bit more about some of these bowl games coming up, especially kind of the New Year's Six stuff and some of the other interesting matchups. Maybe we'll talk a little USF bowl game next week as well, and the playoff. So thank you for watching. We'll be back next week.
Thank you.
Oh, baby.